My name is Mark Semenenko, and I head up the Solutions Architecture team for Immuta. In my presentation today, I'm going to talk about how you can protect all your customer data with a single policy. Now, if you want the short answer, it's attribute-based access control. If you want the longer answer, stick around. But this is all about how you move your data access control from a default no to a default yes. How do I grant permission rather than denying it? But before we talk about that, it wouldn't be a data conference without some tired analogy. So let's talk about data and how, I'm sure you've all heard before at these events, probably multiple times, data is the new oil, it's driving the fourth industrial revolution. But I don't think that analogy quite fits. And I think, in fact, data is more like oxygen. Oil is a finite resource to be used at leisure, to be refined into data products that can be consumed. But data today, I hope no one will disagree, is not just a nice to have, it's essential. Right? Without it, you may not survive. If you are not using data in your decision making, at best, you're leaving money on the table, and at worst, you put yourself at risk of being displaced by an innovative competitor. Now, I know you all know why privacy is important, but if you're ever struggling to explain it to somebody else, this is the analogy I always use. Imagine you're on a first date. You sat down opposite someone, and as the conversation flows, you start to realize that they know a lot about you, and you've never met this person before. And then you realize they actually know everything about you. They know where you live, where you work, who you hang out with, who you talk to, whether you're close with your mother, what you like, what you dislike. And suddenly you start to realize that there is a huge power imbalance here, right? Suddenly somebody I've never met before. Imagine that, you're sat there, somebody you've never seen before in your life knows everything about you. And that is like data privacy, right? That's why privacy is important. It's important that your privacy as an individual, all of us here in this room, is protected because data about you is ultimately power over you. That's why this is important. So, now that we know that privacy is important, and let's indulge me and assume that we think that data is more like oxygen, what are the consequences of thinking of data like oxygen? Well, first, we discussed you need it to survive. It's essential. I don't think any of you would be at this event if you didn't see at least some importance of data. But secondly, at high concentrations in oxygen-rich environments, the chance of catastrophe is massive. Oxygen and any fuel source has extremely dangerous consequences. And organizations have been seeing this every time there's a data breach, when the fines and the consumer trust falls and the contracts are breached, everyone is damaged when this stuff goes up. And so what has happened, as we've seen with things like the GDPR and regulation all around the world, is that governments are acting to protect individuals from this risk. And the onus is on companies to enforce those controls. But it's not just for regulatory reasons that you want to enforce these controls in your organizations and put those safety measures in place. You also have a duty to your business to ensure that you retain your customers' trust. Whether those customers are consumers or businesses, you need to maintain that trust. And as such, a lot of organizations now have specific clauses in contracts that they write that data is only used in specific ways and for specific purposes. So how do we manage our oxygen then? How do we manage our data to make sure that we can use it to survive, but make sure that it doesn't go up in our face? Now, that's what the rest of the talk is really about, and I will get to the single policy that protects all your customer data at the end. But the thought to start with here is that how you manage access to that data, how you control it, is a huge roadblock to scaling. Now, probably 50% or more of the stands here talk about scaling in one dimension or another, right? Whether I'm scaling compute or scaling storage or scaling speed of search or scaling my BI, whatever it is. But access control is one of the roadblocks that most people don't tend to think about. And the reason for this is that as you start small, it's quite easy to manage your data. It's quite easy to say, you get it, you don't, you do, you don't. Think about this. For every piece of data in your organization, and for every person that might want to use that data, there needs to be a policy decision. You need to decide whether to grant access, and if you do grant access, what level of access. And of course, if you double the number of sources, double the number of users, you don't get double the number of policies. You get a combinatorial explosion of policies that you now need to manage. And so as data grows, your policy grows exponentially, causing a failure with data access, causing probably the symptoms that some of you see in your organizations, which are either knowing that people are using data in ways that they shouldn't, or that people are not getting access to the data that they should. So either they're suffocating or they risk blowing themselves up. And so this, as I said, grows on two axes. As your user complexity increases and your data complexity increases, so too does your access control complexity. And it doesn't scale linearly. I know I've drawn a line here, but this does make it strangles companies today. That you put all your data, you make investments in some of the vendors here today, you put your data all in one place, that is great. And then you have to ask yourself, now everyone has access to all of the data in my whole organization. Should they have access to all of the data in my whole organization? Who are you? What are you doing with my data? So the way we used to do this was RBAC, role-based access control. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that term. So let's use an analogy to explain how RBAC, role-based access control, differs from attribute-based access control. If I wanted to send an email to all of the remote members of my pre-sales team, I might go to my inbox and type in to try and find the distribution list for that group. Now, that's if even one exists, because I may have a remote employees list, I may have a pre-sales list, I may have lists based on region, but maybe I don't have that exact combination. So at that point, I might need to go and create it. But even if by chance there is a remote pre-sales group, am I even sure it's accurate? Who created that distro list? As people have joined my organization, who's keeping that up to date? If people change roles, who's keeping that up to date? At Immuta, we have 264 employees and 714 email distros. And that's not even enough. Right? And this is what's happening in role-based access control in your data lakes. So what if we did this with an ABAC model, with an attribute-based model? Well, then it becomes a lot more simple. I can say I want to send an email to all remote pre-sales, so I want to send it to pre-sales where location equals remote. And you can see how simply you can bring in user attributes to make decisions about where things should go. And so we take the exact same practice and apply it to your data lakes and your analytical environments, where we take user metadata and data metadata and combine it. So this is really the piece that RBAC misses, is that user metadata and that context. So not just who you are, but tell me a bit about yourself, like the first date from earlier. You know, which country are you in? What is your job title? What customers are you responsible for? All of these can be used as attributes to define policy decisions. And we can even start to bring in other contexts here as well, like purpose. You know, if I work for a financial institution, when I come in on a Monday, I might be doing pricing for my customer. And when I come in on a Tuesday, I might be doing pricing for the bank. And there are strict rules and regulations about when those two data sets can be combined. Data that I've received from a customer cannot be used when I'm doing bank-side pricing. So that context, who you are and the reason you are accessing the data, is the missing piece in role-based access control that attribute-based access control gives you. So if we look at how we construct an attribute-based access control policy, so one of the strengths of attribute-based access control is that you can choose where it applies based on attributes as well. So do I want to apply it to all of the data in my entire data lake? Do I want to apply it to certain tables that have certain attributes about themselves? We can still use that data, metadata. Or we can have individual data owners create their own policies. Because these are all done with natural language, right? I want to say what I'm going to protect. My customer data. How am I going to protect it? I'm going to hash it, I'm going to redact it, I'm going to drop it all together. Maybe I want to filter by rows. When am I going to do this? Is it based on purpose? Is it based on all the time, forever? Is it by exception, or is it by rule? And then who does this apply to? So if I am masking, who am I masking for? Or if I am allowing access, who are the exceptions to that rule? So are you all ready to see the one single policy that can protect all of your customer data? We've had one yes. Anyone else? Anyone else? Good. Yeah, okay. Drum roll, please. Mask columns tag customer using hashing for everyone, except when a user is a member from the group claims. That is the definition of an attribute-based access control policy. We know what we're doing, or what we're protecting. We know how we're protecting it. We know who we're protecting it for, and who we're not protecting it for. And as long as our tags are up to date, as long as our attributes are up to date, our policy enforcement will always be up to date. So I can understand the policies that I have authored, and I can understand how they are being applied to my data. Now, did anyone think that was a bit too easy? Like a bit of a cop-out, just a single policy, just I wrote this down? I think that's fair. That is fair. There is a bit more that you do need to do to get to this stage. Broadly, there's 3 things you need to do to get to this point. First thing you need to do is you do need to know your data. It's quite hard to protect stuff if you don't know what it is. Thankfully, there are tools out there to help you to discover and classify. If you want to learn more about Immuta sensitive data discovery, come by our booth a bit later on. But also, there's plenty of excellent vendors out here that specify exactly in that capability. Secure your data, so right down to the row and cell level. It's not good enough to do table level controls. You need to be able to say, for this record, this user is hash for this user, but not for this one. And you want to, ideally, eliminate access request workflows. At their core, an access request workflow is somebody resolving attributes. If I put in a request for data, somebody somewhere is going to go, right, Mark, yeah, so he's in the UK team, yeah, and he's passed his security awareness this month, so yeah, that's good. And he is in this job title and he's in this group, so yes, he gets access to that data. But they're all attributes that we probably know, so why don't we automate that process? Equally, there will always be exceptions, so you do still need to be able to manage for that. And the final piece of this puzzle then, the third pillar, is monitor as well. It's not good enough to know what your data is. It's not good enough to say you've protected it, but it's also critical to monitor who is using what, who has access to what, why are users querying for specific data sets, and do things like compliance reports or anomaly reports. If any of you work in finance, I'm sure in organizations, every bank I've ever spoken to said, once every 2 years, I have to fire a data analyst for doing something naughty. Why not prevent them from doing that in the first place, but keep an eye on them anyway? So if you can do that, if you can implement those 3 pillars and implement true attribute-based access control, you can trust that your data is protected because the policies are understandable, who your users are, and you know what the data is. Your team is empowered to use that data and get access to it when they need it, without these 2, 3, 4 week, month delays. And you can scale this access. And this is the key thing here, right? If you have one table and 2 users, you don't need attribute-based access control. But when you want to scale to thousands of data sources, tens of thousands of users, or beyond, you need a better access control model than role-based. So thank you very much for attending this talk. Is there a roving mic for questions? I'm not sure. If anyone has any questions, please do feel free to come by the booth. I'm not sure if we've got a microphone. I don't know if are we doing Q&A? We can do Q&A. Yeah, there's a microphone coming just for you, sir.
Thank you for all of that. Just one point that eludes me, and that is the insider dangerous analyst who is classed with all of the attributes that you want, none of the ones that you don't want, and he or she is the person who is going to extract stuff and take it away.
Sure. So I guess the example there would be the CEO, right? He has every attribute, he has every permission, he's got root access to your AWS. Yeah. Unfortunately, attribute-based access control doesn't solve for that particular scenario. But what it does do is it makes sure that, so when people are trying to solve this problem with role-based, new employee joins the organization, and the first thing that happens is they need access. And so IT is tasked with granting access, and the first thing they do is just say, who is he like? Who's on his team? Who is he working next to or near? And they just copy the roles from that user onto the next user. And so over time, if you add a new one and you copy again, add a new one, then those roles accumulate. With attribute-based access control, you eliminate that risk because it's always based on their attributes. If their job title changes, if their location changes, if anything about them changes, the policy is always up to date. So thank you all very much for attending. 2 final bits from me is if you do want to know any more about how you can build those 3 pillars for your organization, our booth is straight that way on your left. And more importantly, we are running a 45-minute tour of London around some of the sites around here with a complimentary high tea, a few drinks. So if you would like to attend that, someone at the back holding a big Immuta paddle will take you off, 45-minute bus tour, bit of lunch, bit of drinks. So please feel free to take us up on that. But otherwise, thank you very much. I'll be at the booth all day. Come and ask me questions.